David, welcome to DiamondWar podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here as my first guest.
I'm honoured, Ben. I'm delighted to be here. I'm so excited for this.
So, as I said to all of you in my intro, David Norman is really part of an amazing family of pearl dealers, 6 generations, and I'm really excited about bringing his story to you today, and also getting a deep insight into the pearl markets as it stands today, and obviously the history of pearls. So here we go. But so David, just give our listeners an introduction and a brief overview of your story, and then we'll start to look back in time and talk about your family history.
Thanks, Ben. Well, I've been in the pearl business since I'm 56 years old. I've been in the pearl business since I was 18 years old. I grew up in London and I'm part of this pearl family that goes back to 1830, and have always been obsessed with pearls all the time as a kid, going to my dad's office near Hatton Garden, and learning to love pearls and all the characters in the business. And then luckily, instead of going to university, going to Tokyo and learning the pearl business with my teacher, Mr. Jerwood, who owned a pearl farm with my dad in Thursday Island here in Australia.
Yes,
It's been an amazing journey. And then to have been able to meet all the great men of the pearl business during my lifetime who were still alive and then were, at the top of their game when I was 18 has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. You talk about your teacher and obviously then your father, but the gemstone and jewelry business really is a family business, isn't it? It's a common thread we see. It's very rarely that you don't not see a family involved.
Very much so. And when you go into those huge families that you get in countries like India, where they've had mines and cutters and polishers and jewelry makers for thousands and thousands of years, and you see pictures of Lord Krishna wearing pearl necklaces, and the history of from Burma and imperial times, and go back to the Mughal warriors, and then you go into China and America. It's very much I suppose dynastic dynasty. It's very, in traditional British life, a few hundred years ago, the first son inherited the estate, the second son became a soldier, and the third one had to be a priest. And I think in these larger families, in countries where they had more kids, especially India, there'd be a lot of kids coming into the business. And it was just the thing you did. I did what my dad did. I did, like Bruce Springsteen saying, I used to do just like my daddy did. And it's it's got such a rich heritage. It's quite a part of our lives.
But there's something really charming about that as well, because I think in this, we're here 2020, we've just had a economic boom at the end of the 20th century. We've had a dot-com boom. We've got tech entrepreneurs who make billions of dollars within a year or two, and there's an element of every man for himself, and how much money can I make, how quickly can I make it, which is there's something admirable in a lot of the people who really are successful. But maybe with this COVID thing that's come out now, there's a little bit more of this, what's meaningful and what's good work. So maybe people will be thinking, well, I'll stick with the team, I'll stick with the family and work and do things. I'm sure that crosses over to other industries, which you might stick in and go for it.
And definitely, the major theme I've seen in the COVIDs, talking to people all over the world, is what you'd call unity consciousness, where people are using the phrase, we're all in this together. And we're realizing that we're an interconnected world, and what happens in Chernobyl affects Sweden and Mexico.
Yes.
And what happens everywhere, it's all interconnected. And I do think we'll see, when we come out of this, we'll see a much more connected time, where people really put enormous value on relationships and being more kind and loving to each other. Whereas before, since the Industrial Revolution, it's been, since the 1800s, how much is in it for me and what can I get?
Yeah, wow. And that's another very interesting point. If you think back to gemstones and jewelry, in my experience in the jewelry business, and when I see people buying fine gemstones, and you can see that there's a deep emotional connection to the gemstone they're purchasing and giving as a gift. And I think that that's where it really is an understanding of the true driver of why pearls or diamonds or any other gemstone has gone on and stood the test of time, because there is that interconnectedness with the, number one, the value, but second of all, the meaning of the family meaning, or the talisman.
Very much so.
Piece.
And as you see in the great collections of jewellery, when they come through at auction, for example, Marie Antoinette's Baroque pearl sold for $35 million American dollars last November. And then Elizabeth Taylor owned La Peregrina, the famous pearl that Queen Mary was given for a wedding present by King Philip of Spain in the 1550s. And the same pearl 500 years later at 2000 is now in a museum. But Elizabeth Taylor was given it in the 70s by Mike Todd, her second husband, I think. And it sold in the auction of all her jewellery for about $11 million. But to trace that pearl back and realise that Mike Todd was in love with her and bought her that, and King Philip of Spain might not have been in love with Queen Mary, and they had to try and make a baby and unite. In those days, it was more marriage for political reasons. But gemstones through history have such importance and meaning. I'm lucky enough to find out that my grandfather on my dad's side came from Russia, went to Paris and then to England, and he bought 3 imperial Easter eggs, the royal serpent egg and a couple of others, in 1927 in Moscow, and then sold them to the Fabergé de la Wardsky. But the eggs were like a gift from the Tsar of Russia to his wife to commemorate Easter and resurrection and rebirth and everything. And so there's so much symbolism in jewelry through the ages, whether it is pearls or diamonds or rubies or whatever it is. And the fact that it gets handed down the line. Like my favorite possession is a Bulgari clanky bracelet of intaglios that my mum wore every day. And when she was giving away lots of her jewelry, I said, "Mummy, I want that bracelet if I may," because she had lots of other things that were different and nicer maybe that my sisters wanted, but I really wanted that. And whenever I touch it today, it's Mummy. It's like it's my mum. She passed away 16 years ago now, but it's so important because it was her clanky intaglio Bulgari bracelet.
Yeah, and there's no value you could put on that.
No, completely priceless.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing. Like, number one, the buying of the Fabergé eggs and selling them back to Wardsky. That's just an incredible story. But why don't we go back and there's so much we can talk about here. But let's just go back to the beginning. There's 6 generations of Norman or pearl dealers in your family, and so Nathan Goldstein, your senior, born in Odessa, Russia.
In Odessa, Russia. So the family started off, apparently, we go back 7 generations in this story, and they went from Russia to Hong Kong. Yep. And somebody in the family, Nathan Goldstein's father, made a lot of money in a brothel and an opium den in Hong Kong. And to legitimize the money, this is the family story that I found out when we had a family Melbourne anniversary of all the relatives in the last 100 years were there, and people in their 90s and everybody. So with this money, he sent a son to Canada and a son to Australia, which is Nathan Goldstein Senior and his brother. And they were to make money in diamonds, but they didn't make any money in diamonds. And so Nathan Goldstein Senior became a pearl dealer, and there was a big pearl boom on for natural pearls. This would have been he would have been born 1830. His son Nathan Jr. was 1860, and he married Rebecca Goldstein. His sister was Rebecca Goldstein, who married my grandfather from Russia, who was called Michel.
Okay, so let's just go back a little bit. So just explain to me what the natural pearl market was like in the 19th century in Australia. What were they looking for? What did they have?
So the difference between natural pearls and cultured pearls. Cultured pearls, you take an oyster, you put a nucleus in, and the oyster's irritated, covers it with nacre and makes a pearl. And this was started in 1906 by Kokichi Mikimoto in Japan. But if you go back for the preceding millions of years since oysters have been around, if an oyster was naturally irritated by a little crab or a sea creature or an irritation of any kind, it produced a pearl. It's the gift of Mother Nature. Oysters make pearls. And so literally for as long as there's been oysters, there's been pearls. But in recorded history, we know it going back a few thousand years, all pearls that came out of oysters were natural. And my dad told me that before money, a lot of islanders would have just dealt in shells. They were shiny and they could swap them and use them as currency 5,000 years ago. And then once people could do it, they started making items out of shells. 100 years ago, at the turn of the century, all the buttons came from mother of pearl, the inlay of pistols, the crucifixes, all sorts of things were made of mother of pearl. And if you found a natural pearl, you were very excited. And the first huge treasure trove of natural pearls came in the 1500s, when they discovered the New World, North and South America, and all the Spaniards and the Portuguese brought them back to Europe, where they found their way into the royal families principally. But it was the richest resource in the world 500 years ago.
Panama and places like that's where
Venezuela, Panama, all those explorers. And that's why the Spaniards and the Portuguese, which was a tiny little place, Portugal, but it became the most important seafaring nation with Vasco da Gama and Cortez and all those great conquistadors who took Catholicism into South America and North America and brought back all their natural pearls and things. But as long as there have been rivers in Scotland and America, everywhere, and oysters, there's been pearls.
So we're talking the natural pearl business, pre-cultured pearls, starting at the beginning of the 20th century. Obviously, the natural pearls were being used in jewellery, but was there a use of trade for pearls as capital? Or do you think that they were for wealthy people?
It was mainly for wealthy people and for adornment. Yeah. But pearls were had a complete boom in the Roaring Twenties and in the 1920s. And there's the most famous story in the pearl business is that Cartier swapped their building. Well, they bought a building on Fifth Avenue and 56th Street for the price of 2 natural pearl necklaces and $100. From a customer, and there's a plaque on the store showing that. And at the time, everyone said, you're completely crazy. The pearls are worth so much more. But of course, now they've got this amazing building. And then in the Wall Street crash of 1929, everybody used to pay with promissory notes, my dad told me. And so you'd buy the natural pearls and promise to pay your dealer, I promise to pay you in 90 days or 100 days. But nobody could honour their notes, and they all lost their value and their money when everything crashed in October of 1929. And my granddad apparently lost his fortune and had to move the family from Paris to London, where he set up the Australian Pearl Company in 1934. Okay. But he was a great wheeler dealer, and I would imagine in the crash there would be some amazing deals for buying things.
Well, it's like that ultimate fear trade. You know, we see very large diamonds or gold being purchased when, you know, there's a recession or there's a crash in the market. We've seen a little bit of that recently with COVID in large diamonds. So it's they are anomalies. Obviously, there is for the brave, but it's there is that ultimate store of value. Right?
Yes. So and natural pearls have had another second boom the last 10 years, where they've fetched phenomenal prices, culminating with Marie Antoinette's pearl selling for 33 million American dollars.
Yeah, so 2018, I've got 36 million, or maybe that was.
Yes, and if you made a copy of it and said, David, I'm going to copy Marie Antoinette's pearl, how much are you going to charge me for a Baroque pearl like that? We'd be pushing it to spend more than $3,000 to $5,000 to $10,000, but the natural version sold for 33 million. So because it's natural, where there's no nucleus, and if you x-ray it, you just see a pinprick at the center, and you just see layers. A pearl's like an onion with layers and layers of nacre. Yeah. And that's what it is. But it's the provenance and the history. And the Duke of Windsor, of course, gave magnificent jewels to Wallis Simpson, the Duchess of Windsor. Yes. And so whenever there's an iconic family story as well, the provenance seems absolutely
so there is a lot. So with the history of, obviously, the pre-cultured pearls, the provenance of most antique natural pearls is usually quite amazing. Yes. And therefore that it adds to the intrinsic value. I you know, in my experience, obviously we see the difference in price between when we do find in the estate jewellery trade or in the antique trade, we find a natural pearl. We were lucky enough to find quite a large one once, which we sold very quickly. and probably the dealer who bought it went on and sold it on and on and on again for much more. But that did emerge here in Sydney, which was quite interesting. So the natural pearl business was Australia could have a natural pearl business because we were in the area where we have all this shell growing up around the Northwest Territories of Australia.
80 Mile Beach at the top of northwest of Australia, centering around Broome. And at the turn of the century, when there was a boom on for the shell and the shell products, 1900, there were 500 boats with 500 captains, 500 diving crews. They're all searching for shells. And if they're lucky enough to find an amazing natural pearl as well, in this boom that went on until 1929, fortunes were literally made overnight, a bit like opal miners coming out here in 1900. And you'd had the California gold rush, so jewelry as a thing, or as a commodity, and gold, for example, in 1890s, you had that mass migration to California for the gold. And before that, I suppose people had migrated to find tin in cheaper days.
The fever.
But opals were found in Queensland and pearls in Broome. And it was an extraordinary time. Like, Broome's a population, when it swells to its capacity of 25,000 in what we call in Australia the dry season. But in the wet season, when it's boiling hot and rainy, it's like 5 to 10,000 people. But to imagine 500 full crews, and they were from all over Asia and everywhere, diving down to get the oysters, to get the pearls. And so that was an enormous industry in itself, and part of the great wealth. And they say that Australia in 1901 was the richest country in the world. It had it had all the sheep, I suppose, and agriculture, and then it had some minerals as well. But I suppose agriculture was the big part of it, and all that land. And Melbourne was the centre of the gem trade, I think, then.
Yeah. So that's interesting. Another point I wanted to talk about was, the pearl divers. It's a hard man's game, this, right? Like, what I know of pearl divers are some of the guys who are my age who, went off and were doing the cultured pearl business and diving, and they were always fit, and they could do the time and the long days. But the original natural pearl divers, it was a lot more rugged, let's say.
It was, and the tides in Broome around this pearling area are 15 metres, 45 feet. So that means the sea rises 45 feet every day, twice, and descends. And there's massive tidal movements. And the divers had hard hats on, and the pipe coming down with some air, and if they came up too fast, they got the bends, which is where there's a nitrogen bubble in your system. And life was so cheap. There's 2 cemeteries, one for Japanese and one for Chinese, and then another cemetery full of dead divers. And it was John Steinbeck wrote the book The Pearl. It was a big industry. So my great uncle Alec Goldstein was the doctor in Broome, and he put the first iron lung into the Broome Hospital in 1937. So Nathan Goldstein's daughter Rebecca married my grandfather, and his son became the doctor in Broome in 1937 and put the first. But before that iron lung, if you got the bends, with a nitrogen bubble, you'd die. And life was so cheap and pearls were so valuable. It was a cruel world, but an amazing town,
Yeah, wow.
There were Aboriginal divers, there were Malays, Kupangs, all different Thursday Islanders. It must have been an extraordinary melting pot. And those divers would be so, like hard drinking, hard swearing men. There were brothels. It was an extraordinary time.
It's, it makes me think, what a gold rush would be, or when you think about the opal miners and sometimes the danger they put themselves in by just going and going with the fever of striking it big.
Yes.
Wow. So, and that leads on, well, I suppose, pearl farming. Like, so we have natural pearls, we have these pearl divers looking for these very rare natural pearls, but then when did pearl farming start?
Well, so Kokichi Mikimoto wanted and had the dream around the turn of the century, 1900s, he was a successful noodle merchant, and he wanted every woman in the world to own a pearl. And he was inspired by people like Thomas Edison, those sorts of people, to be an inventor. And up until then, only natural pearls were for the top 1% of society, obviously, or less. But he thought if he could copy nature and make a pearl, which took about 12 to 14 years before he had success. And then his dream was from 1906 onwards, was for every woman in the world to possess a pearl. So he had great commercial success, interrupted by the wars, but it really became huge in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But he had success and took his pearls all around the world to the World Fair of Chicago and all over, and that was the birth of the cultured pearl industry in Japan. And then
So Japan is where this all started. So Japanese pearls.
and for 50 years, that's all it was. And then they copied it in Burma, in Myanmar, Burma, in 1954. Australia, the 58, 59. My dad bought the first Australian harvest in 1959. And then in the black pearls from French Polynesia in 1967 was the first good commercial harvest. And then the Philippines followed, where basically wherever you have oysters, you can make pearls. And then Lake Biwa in Japan made freshwater pearls, and China, the Yangtze River, made pearls. And they've got 3,000-year-old pearls from mollusks in the Yangtze River in museums and things. So there'd always been some sort of business, but it was only commercially viable in from the 50s onwards for large pearls, and in Japan from sort of 1920s onwards.
Okay, so I'll just take it back a little bit just for everybody listening in so that we can get a good idea. So Mikimoto in the beginning of the 20th century with Japanese Akoya pearls, the shell is smaller. It's not as big as what we see here in Australia.
Yes, it's sort of 10 centimetres. I'm not good at centimetres. I'm
maybe 8.
Yes, it's little.
And so then obviously coming into
and they were made famous by people like Marilyn Monroe and Princess Grace of Monaco. Grace Kelly wore one on her wedding day. Marilyn Monroe, Coco Chanel wouldn't go downstairs without her pearls. So when you see those iconic pictures of those iconic women, they're wearing Japanese cultured pearls of Mikimoto. Yes.
So then we were talking Burma, then Burma onto Australia, then Australia. That obviously goes back into Tahiti, which has the black lip shell, which produces black pearls, and then obviously there's the history with the Chinese freshwater pearl, but it's a different oyster that it produces multiple pearls as opposed to a single pearl, which we have in the classic cultured pearl in the South Seas.
It's a mollusk, a freshwater mollusk, and it started really in the 70s. People started making freshwater pearls there. So different, where you get different shapes like grains of rice, and more oblong shapes, potato shapes.
So let's talk about the farmers. Okay, so pearl farmers, some are incredibly large, successful, wealthy families who've made a fortune out of pearling, and there are small farmers. Give me an example of the two extremes.
So here in Australia, the Paspaley family have made a dynasty out of pearling, and they made their first pearls, commercial, successful pearls. They started making pearls. Nicholas Paspaley Sr. would have been making pearls from the 1950s and 60s and 70s, but mainly he was dealing in natural pearls, but would have been a shell dealer as well. And his son Nicholas Jr., who was born in 1948. 1948. I'm getting this right.
Yeah.
Yes. He went to sea as a young man in his 80s and started collecting shells and making commercial pearls. And their first commercial harvest was the day before Nicholas Paspaley Sr. died of a heart attack. He saw the harvest and went and had a heart attack and passed away. And that would have been about 1984 or 5. He took me out for dinner in Sydney in 1983. Well, I'll never forget, and he showed me 5 pearls he'd made, and I thought they were for sale and kept asking him if I could buy them, but he wouldn't answer me. But we had a lovely dinner. And his son, Nicholas Jr., who would be about 70 now, has made the most success out of growing amazing pearls and buying up other pearl farmers from the 1980s onwards. And he bought Pearls Proprietary Limited, which was the oldest farm in Australia, which is made famous in Kuri Bay. And he had the boom, which we had in 1989 and 90 in the business. That was the most important 2 years in a way, where pearls were getting $50,000 for the most extraordinary, perfect round pearls per pearl. He's at one end of the scale. Then there were other ends of the scale where there's a lovely family, the Browns in Cygnet Bay in Australia.
Yep.
And they have been dealing in pearls equally a long time, but they've stayed a small family unit, and then they tied up with the Pass Baileys. But now they run an amazing tourist business called where you visit Signet Bay,
Yeah.
and it's an hour by seaplane from Broome, and you see a basic raw production in action.
So is Signet Bay, would it be it's a bay and it's a pearl farm in one area, and it's a
Yes.
5-man operation, or
You need a secluded bay with good tidal movements to flush nutrients into your pearl farm, so the oysters can open and eat the nutrients in the water, the plankton and everything. And you just need no humans basically, but good tidal flow. So Signet Bay would literally need of 5 to 15 people just to keep the oysters clean. And in pearl farming, you're basically putting a nucleus into a host oyster, and then you're leaving it alone for 2 years, except to clean it so that it can open and feed. And the more you leave it alone and let nature do its thing, the better. But when you go to these pearl farms, the marine growth and the heat and the stuff in the water, it's like a teeming with life. So you're perpetually cleaning oysters. And so the Pass Bailey organization has, I think they've got 27 aeroplanes, and they've got 300 boats and 1,000 staff. And the amount of capital spent on just growing a pearl is phenomenal. And then you go to places like Indonesia, where for the price of 5 Australians, you have 300 workers cleaning the oysters. So it's a much lower cost base. And if you go to the French Polynesia, it's the major export with tourism of the island is black pearls. But if you took the grand total of all Tahitian pearls, you wouldn't get more than $100 million at basic farm price in a year.
So you're talking about a year's production for Tahiti,
yes,
value around about $100 million.
Exactly, maximum, at the moment. And then the longer you keep your oysters underwater for 2 years, the bigger the pearls are and the more valuable they are, and you can use your oysters again. But each farming place is different, and pearl farmers are a certain breed. They're absolutely dedicated to making the best pearls they possibly can, and they're sure that their pearls are better than anyone else's, and they prefer the color of their pearls. So as an idiosyncrasy, I'm sure you'll get to interview Nicholas Pass Bailey yourself, but he's not a great admirer of Tahitian pearls. Then other people, but in our business in America, my business where we sell on TV, 70% of the business is Tahitian pearls, 30% is Australian. The Philippines make these amazing golden pearls, and there's an amazing farmer called Jacques Branelec, who was a pilot in Tahiti. Then he became a Tahitian pearl farmer, sold out, moved to the Philippines, married a local lady, teamed up with a billionaire called Manuel Coyungo, who was the pineapple king. And they made these incredible farms with beautiful workers who, I say beautiful, they're beautifully spirited workers. They play Mozart to the oysters, and they make these amazing golden pearls and have like 27 retail stores. So everywhere there are oysters, there are these individual people who are like dynamic people, but they all have in common that they're not fighting nature, they're working with nature, but nature's tough. There's just so much cyclones and things going on, and it's always been a sort of it's like a marriage of man and nature, but at the same time, if things go wrong, you lose your whole harvest. And in Australia, in Broome, there's cyclones coming through every year, and you just lose all your oysters and have to start again.
Well, that's fantastic to sort of hear you connect with how passionate these pearl farmers are, because in my experience, you do realise, and in the times that I have spoken to various people in the gemstone industry and also pearl farmers that I've spoken to independently, you can clearly see that the quality of the pearls and the quality of the work that they do is actually foremost the most important thing. And
we talk about pearls endlessly. Like, I remember working with Nicholas Pass Bailey for him, and we just talk about pearls. We'd go out for dinner quite often with our wives, who would talk about other things. And we just talk about pearls and people in the pearl business for years. Yes. It's an extraordinary thing. And I saw this in my dad. And I just remembered when I was 15, he sold a pearl for 89,000 English pounds. It was a 15 millimeter round, yellow, clean, beautiful, beautiful pearl. And I never forget it. He let me bank the check, and I thought, wow, this is a great business, Daddy. It was amazing. And he sold it to the Alfadan family, and they're the premier family in the world, based in Dubai and Doha, in natural pearls. They're by far the most successful. And their father, who was called Sheikh Maki, was my dad's best customer. He told my dad when he was a kid they only could fish for money. There was nothing. There was no oil. There was no nothing, and he was poor. And when he came to London, he stayed in a rather crappy hotel in Earl's Court, which is where lots of Australians have gone and stayed. And the underground went by rattling around, and he loved the noise. But his two sons stayed in this, like the royal suite of the Intercontinental Hotel, which was the amazing best hotel back then. And he was happy. And he argued with my dad every day for 2 months when it was hot in Doha. He'd be in London for June and July, or July and August, and my dad would ask, £1,000 for a pearl, and he'd offer 200, and they'd meet in the middle. And by the end of 2 months, they'd agree on what they could. But then I met the family many times as a kid, and then it turns out the Alfadans are the most important jewelry family in the Middle East, and they have this huge business in everywhere. And that they're another dynasty, and the Arabians that were so important in modern natural pearl business.
So this your father, Boris Norman,
yes,
born in
1926 in Paris.
1926 in Paris. So I'm looking. You've brought some amazing things in here, but I'm looking at his passport, and I can see the stamp from when he in 21st of June 1965, entry point Darwin, Australia. So is that like...
He went to Darwin, he told me, in the 60s to meet Nick Pass-Bailey Sr. and buy natural pearls from him. Uh-huh. And Nick Pass-Bailey Sr. not only owned a bookmaker, like horse betting, he owned the only hotel in Darwin, and he was the leading pearl man as well.
He was some guy, huh?
Yeah, and Boris, my dad, travelled all over the world buying pearls. His father, Michel, his passport's with my nephew Charlie, who we'll get to later, but he's number 6 in the business. And his passport is full of all these places and stamps as well. And so as a pearl merchant, you were basically, you'd go anywhere there you could find a decent pearl. You'd go there.
Well, it's I'll share this about me. But thinking about this, it reminds me back to my experience when, I think that it was 1996 and I was, working in my mother's antique jewelry store, but pearls were starting to become the thing. And I remember flying to Tahiti and, I mortgaged my house and went and bought, $180,000 worth of pearls off Robert Wan. And I turned up in a red T-shirt. And he just looked at me and thought, wow, who's this kid, with a red T-shirt on, coming to buy all these pearls. And
Robert Wan made half of Tahiti's production. He'd made a lot of money in the food business with supermarkets, and then decided to buy pearl farmers. And he at one time made 50% so he was Mr. Tahiti of the annual production. And he's still going strong. He's in his 80s and often he's half Chinese Tahitian and lives a lot of time. But he was the man, and his pearls were extraordinary.
Incredible. Yeah. But that brings me back to this, thinking about, Boris flying into Darwin in 1965, buying natural pearls. You talk about the negotiation from your great-grandfather or your grandfather in London. And I'd like you to share with me how, like, for those listening, negotiating in the gemstone and jewelry business is unique in its own way, and share with me some of your experience around pearls in negotiating, and how some, I know that some dealers operate in certain ways and others in others. So what's some good experiences around how the deals are done?
Well, when I was 18, I went to Tokyo. My teacher, Mr. John Jerwood, who had his start in life in their family natural pearl business, and my grandfather Michel Norman helped him a lot as a very young man, and then he helped my dad a lot, and they had a pearl farm together. And I said to him on my first day, practically, what's the best pearl you've ever sold? And he said, simple, the one on the invoice. Then I said, and how do you buy them properly? And he said, it's simple, I offer my best price for cash, and I'd say yes or no, but I'll never go back on my offer. That's all there is to it. And that was a very good lesson. And he also said, if you only deal in the best things, there's bags of room at the top, he used to say. But if you deal in the rubbish, you'll be dealing with everybody and it won't be fun. But then I've noticed the Indians, who are a huge part of the pearl business, especially the natural pearl business, they like a haggle. And the Arabs won't, like my dad's customer, Sheikh Maki. He spent 2 months haggling. And it's a bit like that Monty Python movie, The Life of Brian, that you've got to haggle over everything. And if you don't haggle, you don't, it's the big game for some of the people. I'm personally of the Mr. Jerwood model where, I'll offer you £1,000 and if you'll take it, great. And if not, I'll move on. But I notice a lot of people do like haggling and negotiating. And it seems an enormous part of the jewelry business. And I've got a friend who collects jewelry from Turkish people, and every year in Tucson they have a tent set up with Turkish carpets and stuff, and it takes 3 hours for her to buy with endless cups of tea and coming and going, and if you don't haggle you can't get it. So it's typical of each different person how they do it,
So thinking about, I remember Assail in New York,
Salvador
Assail. So share us a little bit about him as a dealer. Like, he's a legend for paying incredibly high prices for cultured pearls in the 80s and 90s.
Yes, Salvador Assail passed away a few years ago, but he was the king of the modern pearl business. I'd have to say, if Mr. Mikimoto was the most important person in cultured pearls, and Nicholas Pass-Bailey is the most important cultivator of cultured pearls, and maybe Robert Wan in Tahiti, then Mr. Assail was the number one marketer of pearls. And when he saw the first Tahitian harvest in 1967, he bought the whole harvest, and he picked the finest 1,000 pearls and sold them to Harry Winston Sr., Harry Winston himself, for $1,000 a pearl, $1 million. And Harry Winston, over 3 years, sold them all. And he launched the gem into the United States market, which has always been the most important modern market for jewelry. By value, you could say. India's an enormous market because of weddings and dowries, but the United States, for sheer opulence, with all the fortunes that were made since the Industrial Revolution, is the go-to market. And Mr. Assail was friends with all the Republican presidents and sold them pearls to President Reagan, President Bush Sr. He really was the man, and he had a wall of pictures with all the famous people and all the Hollywood celebrities he knew, and he was by far the most important marketer. And of course, within the business professionally, when we're jealous of somebody, we don't like them and we disparage them. And he was very disparaged, but I think he did more for marketing pearls than anybody else. And I met him when I was 18. He took me to dinner, and my boss, Mr. Jerwood, said, "You're going to have dinner with Mr. Assail today. And if you divide everything he says by 10, you'll get to the truth." That's how he put it. But I was amazed by him, and I was honoured to be able to work for him and Mr. Pass-Bailey and take over their joint office and have endless lunches with him and just see him in action. And he was just an amazing dealer with huge courage. He'd go and buy a whole harvest and just know what to do with it. And then when you buy a pearl harvest, there's so many pearls you don't want. You've got to make a lot of money out of the best ones, and you've got to make no money at all on the majority of the ones you don't want. But he was a true master.
But if you think about that price, $1,000 for the best one, $1,000 a piece for the very best Tahitian pearls, best 100 or 1,000 Tahitian pearls. Obviously, $1,000 in '67 was a lot of money, but if you had a Harry Winston piece of jewelry with an incredible quality Tahitian pearl today from 1967, well, the legacy of that brand and obviously the piece of jewelry they're making, there's a whole collectability around that.
And they would have been extraordinary. I saw a necklace that in Los Angeles to value that Armand Hammer bought from Harry Winston. And it was the largest black pearl necklace available in the very early 80s, when there wouldn't have been any large pearls. And it was $1.5 million to pay for back in 1982.
Wow. And
you would have bought a massive Hollywood estate for, in the late 60s, when Harry Winston was buying that. You could buy anything, I suppose. A decent house in 1967, a serious house, would have been $50,000 American dollars. You'd get an extraordinary house. So jewelry was valuable.
Well, we often say that when anybody ever balks at the price of an expensive gemstone or piece of jewelry here, people say, "This is as much as a house." I say, "Yeah, but you can't wear a house." Mm-hmm. But so talking about how beautiful or how good the quality is of these pearls, Assel had the ability to pick the best, but as a dealer or somebody who's purveying in these things, you talk about there being a lot of room at the top because very few people are prepared to go in and buy the very best.
And with pearls, it's very easy because if you do buy the whole harvest, luster is the most important value of pearls. Where if it's like an onion, the more skins around the nucleus, which is inserted into the host oyster, the more skins you have, the more luster you have. And pearls are essentially, if you were a chemist, you'd say calcium carbonate. Yeah. Which is the same as teeth, but it's shinier. Mm-hmm. And really, the more nacre you have coating your pearl, the more luster, and then the depth of color, depending on the host oyster, be it black, white, gold, wherever. But you do have to have a mechanism. You buy much better if you buy the pearl harvest, the whole thing, and you need a mechanism in your business to sell the duller, off-shape pearls. Yep. But when you're showing a consumer a perfect pearl, there are no blemishes. 1% of a harvest is this good, and 10% sets clean in a piece of jewelry. But the customer can see with their naked eyes quite clearly there's no marks, and it's super bright and amazing colors. So it's quite an easy item to explain in 10 minutes flat to somebody who's never seen a pearl before what to look for. And we're quite lucky in that way. Yeah. And if you look after your pearls at home, you don't spray them with any perfume or hairspray or anything, they'll last hundreds and hundreds of years, like La Peregrina, which is 500 years old, from Queen Mary through to Elizabeth Taylor. Yes. It's the same composition as a cultured pearl, exactly. So they're quite an enduring item.
So you touched on the skin of a pearl or the nacre of a pearl, which is the layers that grow around the irritant inside the oyster. In gemstones and jewelry, we have certification. So obviously we've seen certificates come out for pearls from the GIA, Gemological Institute of America, which is the global powerhouse in gem institutes. How prolific are certificates in pearls these days?
You cannot sell a natural pearl for the proper price without the certificate proving it's natural, made by nature. Yeah. But in cultured pearls, we've never really bothered too much with certificates. But individual farmers will give guarantees of the pearls are untampered with. They're completely natural, the way they've come out of the oyster. Natural color, natural luster. There's no artificial heat treatments or anything else. But you can't really sell a natural pearl without a certificate.
Okay, so then we talk about nacre and we talk about the thickness of the skin. I know I had a stint in New York, and I was there at the point in time when the GIA were cutting cultured pearls and cutting through them and measuring the nacre thickness.
Yes.
I know some pearl farmers have said, well, look, it's the quality of the nacre that determines the beauty. But you're talking to me earlier about the thickness. So where is that going to go to? Is the thickness really the length of time in the water and the thickness of the nacre really the prerequisite for beauty?
I think if you're selling pearls, you're basically saying the color is up to you. If you like black, white, gold, whatever you like.
Yeah.
But if you never compromise on the luster, you're buying and putting your money into something really beautiful. And if you can see how clean the pearl is, even better. But even if pearls have good luster and they're a bit spotty, which 90% of pearls have some surface blemishes, they're still really good. And I don't see the market going in any particular direction ever. I think pearls have been fashionable since Cleopatra's time, so there's no fashion element. They just, they do seem to be on a roll with houses like Chanel, making a lot of bags and the heels of shoes with pearls and items like that. But I think people kind of can be persuaded of the quality, and they find a level. If someone's got $1,000 to spend, they could get a really nice freshwater pearl necklace from China, or a nice Japanese Akoya necklace, or one single good decent Australian pearl or Tahitian pearl. There's something for everyone. And if you wanted to spend $100,000 and get a really serious necklace or something, you could. So I don't think people are going to so much demand certificates. They're just going to want some sort of promise from the farmer. These are natural, and a lesson from their seller, their retailer.
A guarantee. And okay, so that leads us on to we'll get on to talking about the next generation or your generation, and obviously then Charlie, who's the sixth. But in terms of the jewelers and designers, you just mentioned Chanel, obviously Coco Chanel. really used faux pearls as the way to lead in that glamour that happened in the 1920s, and she really drove that. But there's been some incredible designers out there who've used pearls over the years. Who are the standouts for you in terms of like the obscure small designers, or whether they're a big jewellery house? Which jewellery house has done it best?
I've always loved Chanel for their love of pearls. I've loved Mikimoto for everything they've done because they are the originator of cultured pearls. I've loved Cartier and their use of pearls, going back to natural pearl times. I love your house, Bunda. I'm not here to plug it
No.
particularly, but you're somebody who just absolutely understood the amazing quality of the off-shape pearls and all the different pearls. And I love the way the Paspaleys have created pearls since the 80s. Instead of just farming them, they've become a retail jeweler as well. So all those names.
Obviously, we're not a very big name, but there's some very, very big names in there. But then there's also over the years doing all of the fairs and being in Hong Kong a lot and going to, and I remember there's some Italian guys who are really good with pearls. They're not there's a lot of smaller designers out there who really have done some great things. It's a good way in the jewellery market, isn't it?
Very good. And now the Chinese freshwater pearls are so affordable. Well, they always have been, but they're getting better and better at making them. And Japanese Akoya pearls are plentiful again. There's some amazing designs coming out of everywhere. But I mean, the Italians in the world would have to be the premier designers, and the French of things and artifacts. But Asian designers are amazing as well. There's no better or worse. It's just become a complete global market. And we've seen amazing pearl dealers, like there's a chap we both know called Alain Boite in Paris, who does supply Chanel and all these houses with amazing pearls, and all he does is buy the very best of the best, no matter what, and then sell it on. So really, throughout ages, people have been dealing and making amazing pearls, and you can go back in museums. You can go back 3,000 to 5,000 BC and find there was amazing pearl jewelry. Like the Egyptians must have had some extraordinary jewelry because they were so wealthy from selling corn to the Roman Empire in various places, and their jewelry is incredible. And the Sumerian dynasty, and and pearls have always had this very spiritual quality because they're very connected to the moon and the sun and the stars and the tides. And because humans are made of, I think we're 70 to 90% made of water. So we're very emotional and water-based. And when the moon's full, apparently the New York City police have to put on extra police and nurses because people howl a bit and go crazy with the moon. And pearls, which are grown in tidal areas, cultured, have always been it's a tidal thing. So we're intimately related with pearls and jewelry. And I think if you spoke to a spiritual healer who deals in crystals and gemstones and pearls, they'd say that that God, whatever God is, made gemstones for us to have natural healing powers as well as adornment and beauty. And so designers get inspiration from everything really: sun, moon, stars, water, the whole lot, astrology, everywhere, and it's all sort of wrapped up together in many ways.
Well, it's interesting. I'm doing a little bit of research before our interview, and I'm looking at, obviously I've understood generally the spiritual attributes around pearls, but I'd always known or heard, especially being here in Australia, we've sold so many expensive pearls to the Chinese market, and really the strongest market for the very best pearls. And I was looking beneath, reading about that, and I saw that, the Chinese see the pearl as a symbol of wisdom.
Yes, and there's the famous myth of the dragon guarding the pearl of great price. And the pearl of great price is symbolic. It is a pearl, and the dragon's holding this big round pearl. Yeah. But it is symbolic, as you say, of wisdom, of spiritual knowledge, of eternity, and emotions and humanity. So it's deeply symbolic in Chinese culture.
Yes, yeah, it's and the pearly gates of heaven, right? So
Exactly.
it crosses over into all of the faiths as well, and you can see it.
And the amazing thing about a pearl is it's made out of an irritated oyster. The oyster's irritated, and it covers up this foreign thing with nacre and produces a pearl. So for nowadays with COVIDs, we're also irritated by the effects of being locked down, not traveling, shut down business, economic woe in the world, and all this stuff. But underneath it, there's this huge regeneration of care and kindness coming for a lot of people when we get past our individual fears. And so it's very symbolic, I think, the pearl of something beautiful coming out of enormous irritation. And that's part of the whole spiritual myth around pearls in a way, because it's the people in our lives too who are the most irritating, who are our greatest teachers, as we know from everyone's got family members and we all annoy each other. But they teach us patience and tolerance and all these things. And there's something, I think, with the Chinese holding the pearl as a great symbol of wealth, knowledge, abundance, health, all these things that they. And it's funny, but I used to just run around and sell pearls to retailers and wholesalers. Now we sell mostly on television. And whenever the show, so I've done 11 years of TV selling, and whenever the lady hostesses put the pearls on for the shows, they say, oh my gosh, I feel so regal and special. And there's something about pearls that has this glowing energy that just transforms the wearer, and they feel better about themselves. It's good. It's good for everything inside.
I've seen that firsthand. As a young man working in the business, people often say to me, "Oh, well, how did you learn how to design or make these things?" And the way I explain that is that as in my 20s, I would just see the reaction women would have when wearing jewelry. So that drives my design process now. So you can, they're very soothing, I suppose, and powerful. But so talking about TV, so Charlie Barron
so my elder sister Alice has a son Charlie, three girls and a boy. Charlie is 25 years old, born in London. And Charlie, from 10, when he was 10, came to Sydney with his parents. They all walked the Harbour Bridge. He was too small, so he came to my office for the day. And his three big sisters got to climb the Harbour Bridge with the parents. And he spent the afternoon with me, and we had some lunch. And in this very office where my office was, and at 10, he finished afterwards and said, right, I'm going to be a pearl dealer. And Charlie's funny because he believes in reincarnation, and he's sure he's been royal. He can't believe he has to work for a living. He's horrified he's not a duke or a king or something, and he feels very tied up with Paris. And he basically decided that when I leave school, I'm going to be like Uncle David and be a pearl dealer. So we took him and we sent him to all the best places in the world. He went to the Pas Baileys, he went to the Autores. He went to Edward Asher in Amsterdam and learnt diamonds. He went to the GIA, the Gemological Institute of America in London. He went to Japan to our dear friend Andy Muller in Kobe. And he basically had this 3 years of complete study and then became the sixth pearl dealer. And we set up the Australian Pearl Company, which had kind of fallen into, I didn't inherit it, and it just sort of died in a way because I was busy working for the Australian farmers and my dad had inherited it. So Charlie revitalized it and is a London pearl dealer selling to Garrards and Aspreys and all those sorts of people. And he's now learned the estate jewelry business as well. So he loves natural pearls, and he has become the foremost expert in London at 25 years old of his generation of pearls. But each generation, somebody seems to take up the mantle and love pearls. My brother became an accountant, hated going to my dad's office. I was obsessed to be in there, and Charlie's been the same. So he's amazing, and he's on TV on a channel called Gemporia in the UK for 3 years now, and he's a natural. He's absolutely amazing.
Well, I saw him in Hong Kong last year, and he was running between two high-end estate jewelry booths, and he had a natural pearl in his pocket, and he just pulled it out and showed me and said, "Oh, what do you think of this?" And I could see that he had the fever. He really loved it.
Yes.
Well, David, thank you so much for taking the time to come in today. It's been such a pleasure and really an honour to be able to have you as my first guest on the DiamondWar podcast. I'm sure.
Ben, thank you so much. I'm so honoured to be the first guest, and it's so amazing to be able to recall all the stories and put it into perspective and be with you. And I hope we've contributed some knowledge and excitement around
Yeah.
the pearl world on Diamond Wars. And I thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. And our families have been so connected now since the early 1980s, when I met your darling mother Veronica, who's still super active in the business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you. And that it's just really fantastic to be able to sit down and to have a good insight into the true history of the pearl business. It's an amazing business. It's important in terms of the jewelry world, and there's some incredible characters. And thank you for sharing your knowledge and insights. And I hope that our first listeners really get to enjoy this podcast. Thank you.
Thank you so much.